2025 so far has consistently dropped banger after banger video games. But in between the insane amount of releases, I managed to find a small bit of space to work in a game that I have been putting off for a long time. Dark Souls 2. I initially skipped over this game and never planned on trying it because most of the discussion revolving around DS2 are people dogpiling the worst aspects and making it seem like the most worthless piece of garbage ever made. I mean, imagine hearing that a game in a series that is already meant to be challenging has unforgivable design choices that make it unbearable. Yeah, I'll pass. Well, I could say after playing through all of the main game and DLC, I definitely have some thoughts. Now, to be clear, this isn't an in-depth critique on everything. I won't be covering the story, and might miss something that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy. If this happens, I invite you to please go into the comment section and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like. Also, just a disclaimer, I didn't plan on making this video until after I finished DS2, and so I don't have any recorded footage of me going through the game. What you're seeing on screen right now is just me going through the last area of the DLC over again. So this is very much you can listen over watching kind of video. Right off the start, I want to say that I don't think Dark Souls 2 is as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. Is it the worst Souls game in the FromSoft catalog? Yeah, I'd say that's a fair statement to make. Is it unfair and challenging though? Well, I think it's not as simple as yes or no. To start off with the things I don't like about this game, I think we have to talk about enemies, but more specifically, enemy density. In every Souls game, whether it be DS1, DS3, Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, it always felt like there was careful planning or reasoning as to why enemies were placed where they were. Most areas could be cleared fairly easily as long as you were keeping up with levels and whatnot, with maybe 1 or 2 sections per area being somewhat challenging, requiring a lot more planning and caution. But the point is that it never became overbearing or felt like a chore. In fact, those sections felt needed in those games to spice up the levels and not make it brain dead easy. In Dark Souls 2, every single room in every single area required this level of caution and planning. Especially in the early game, when your stamina is low, your HP is low, and the hollow effect feels a lot more punishing. Constantly having to check my corners before going through a doorway, worrying about if the 5 dudes in front of me were going to be joined by 5 more enemies from behind me, who I didn't even see because of some weirdly hidden passageways, and the fact that this, again, was almost every single encounter, with bonfires being incredibly spaced out. And to be clear, you can try running past enemies in this game, but the consequence of that is having the 11 enemies from the previous area join you in the next encounter you come across. Have fun with that. Speaking of bonfires, I want to talk about my dislike of how this game uses the fog wall mechanic and also the hidden walls. To understand my dislike of the fog walls and how that relates to bonfires, I need to give you guys a story about what happened during my playthrough. On the level where you fight the boss in the poison pool, I can't remember her name, there was this long interior section where you have to deal with a bunch of hard-hitting enemies. There were headless knights, pot-belly hammer dudes, and pyromancers that dealt insane amounts of damage. It had been a long time since my last bonfire, and I was definitely struggling with my resources. I came across an area with a small fog wall and another path. Seeing as I hadn't run into the boss of this area, I thought this fog wall was the boss, and that the alternate path was just a chest or something. So I decided to leave the fog wall for later. Long story short, this path wasn't just a chest, and I ended up dying. I died a few more times trying to just get back to this fog wall, just to see what it really was. And when I actually go through it, lo and behold, it's literally just a bonfire. It's not another pathway, it's not a boss, it's literally just a small platform with a bonfire. My point being, bonfires in this game are extremely hidden sometimes. Fog walls should be used as a way to separate new areas or to lead into a boss fight. not to hide a bonfire and cause the player to second guess if going through it will lead to a boss. The same goes for hidden walls. I felt like in any other Souls game, there was always a way to tell when there was a hidden wall somewhere, whether it be the design or the position. At the very least, they wouldn't be used an insane amount. In Dark Souls 2, there are hidden walls everywhere, some containing crucial bonfires, and they literally do not have any kind of tell. The worst part is that you can only activate these hidden walls by pressing the interact button. Attacking or rolling will not do anything, and that makes it way harder to find. Finally, the last thing that really irked me when I was playing were some of the absolutely horrible boss runbacks. And you all knew this was coming. But more specifically, I'm talking about the Dark Lurker and the Blue Smelter Demon. To be clear, there are many bosses in this game that have bad runbacks, but if they did, I beat them on my first or second try anyway, so I didn't really have to experience it all that much. But these two boss fights genuinely worked me, and the runback is seared into my brain at this point. It's so bad that I might actually have to see a therapist about it. The Dark Lurker is a fight that you can only access by going through a questline, which, to summarize quickly, you donate a human effigy, go into a portal, kill 3 invaders, light a torch, and then repeat in 2 other areas. Once you do this, you can access the fight. Except the problem is, to fight the Dark Lurker, you have to repeat the process of killing 3 invaders every single time. And since these guys do a good chunk of damage, you have to slowly and carefully clear them out each time, on top of the fact that you're losing a human effigy on every attempt, which, if I didn't mention before, is also the only way to clear hollowing. The Blue Smelter Demon isn't quite as bad as that, but it's still atrocious, especially because I remember that all my deaths to this boss were just stupid misplays by me. But to explain it simply, you have to run past a bunch of mages and hard-hitting melee enemies, while also dealing with some assholes who cast a spell forcing you to fat roll the entire time. Obviously saying this might not sound that bad, but going through it yourself will show you just how bad this truly is. Oh, and also one more thing I didn't like was weapon durability. My god, it felt like I could only use my weapon for 5 minutes before having to use repair powder, or replace it with another weapon entirely. Now you might have noticed that I haven't mentioned the infamous ADP stat, and well, that's because I think that criticism is blown way out of proportion. Don't get me wrong, this stat shouldn't have existed in the first place, but it's not as bad as people online make it seem. Most enemies in this game have very straightforward movesets that are fairly well telegraphed and can be dodged with decent timing or just straight up strafes around for an easy backstab. The bosses for the most part are insanely easy and again have very simple combos that at most go up to 3 hits and can be dodged very easily. By the time you reach mid to endgame, your ADP should be at a level where you can roll anything normally, so yeah, even though the stat definitely shouldn't exist, it's not that bad. Now, let me move on to the things that I actually liked about this game. One minor thing I want to mention, because I didn't realize this until I watched this video, is that DS2 is the first game to add in a proper form of respecking. Can you imagine how miserable games like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring would have been if we couldn't switch up our build mid-playthrough? Round of applause, Dark Souls 2, round of applause. Anyways, the first thing I genuinely appreciated about Dark Souls 2 was exploration, but more specifically, the gimmicks. I don't think any of the future titles in FromSoft's catalog had as much fun with these kinds of ideas when compared to Dark Souls 2. My favorite gimmick I can think of was when I was going through the Forest of Giants and desperately needed a bonfire. I was in the area where you first run into the Pursuer and was pretty much down to no Estus and a couple of life gems. Randomly out of nowhere, I get hit by a firebomb, which opens up a shortcut to a bonfire all the way back at the beginning of the area. It was one of those moments that just made me stop with my mouth wide open because I didn't even plan that. Looking back, it's clear that the wall looked cracked and breakable, but it happened by pure accident right after saying I needed a bonfire. The Dark Souls gods were really watching over me that day. Some other gimmicks I appreciated were approaching a door that says locked and hitting it, only for enemies on the other side to open the door for me. or lighting up the Lost Sinners arena with torches so you can see easily, using a torch to keep the spiders away during the Duke's Dear Freya boss fight, the Knights and Dragon Aerie not attacking you and respecting the 1v1s against the big knights, and the whole Ivory King boss fight when you gather the 4 knights. The exploration in this game definitely isn't perfect. Like I said before, lots of enemies that rely on ambushes to kill you and very hidden bonfires, but there's still a lot to love and appreciate here that I feel people don't talk about enough. One more thing I want to mention that I enjoyed were the boss fights. Now don't get me wrong, there are a ton of boss fights in this game that straight up weren't fun and just gang fights, like the Rat Vanguard, where the only way to distinguish between the regular rats and the actual boss was the fact that the actual boss had a fade. But after finishing the game, I'm surprised to say that in some ways the bosses kind of felt similar to Dark Souls 3 bosses. At least in the sense that they weren't pulling out insane 16-hit combos and flashy attacks, but more fair combos that were at most 3 hits and fairly well telegraphed. Fights like Sir Alone, Velstadt, the Old Dragon Slayer, Fume Knight, and many others genuinely were somewhat fun to fight. And thinking back on it, if there was a fight I didn't even enjoy in this game, it was either a gang fight or it was just because the runback was so atrocious. Maybe I might be giving these bosses too much credit, but after hearing so much negativity around Dark Souls 2, I thought so many of these bosses would be a pain, but I couldn't be more wrong. But yeah, that's pretty much what I loved and didn't love about Dark Souls 2. If I had to give a rating, it would probably be a 7.5 out of 10. I know it sounded like I had a lot more negatives to say, but the bad and good really did outweigh each other in the end, and I could definitely see myself revisiting this game after a decent break. Let me know your thoughts on Dark Souls 2 in the comments, what you liked and didn't like, and maybe even subscribe if you enjoyed this rambling session from me. Thank you all for watching.